Hello, sunshine. I'm ALEXI LALAS, and welcome to the State of the Union podcast, where we look at the beautiful game on and off the field through the lens of red, white, and blue-colored glasses. This week, we'll be talking Messi and Beckham and U.S. players heading over to Europe and our favorite TV and movies from 2020. All sorts of good stuff in the show this week. Our first show of the year 2021, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I venture to say that there's a lot of people out there, including the people that you're about to listen to, that are looking for good and better things in 2021. But first, joining me as always, my friend, my colleague, my guiding light, David Mosse. David Mosse, 2021, a soccer savant as always, and a Fox Soccer researcher and writer extraordinaire as always. Mosse, how are you on this, as I mentioned, Monday, January 4th in the year 2021? We took a little break. We took a little week off. I think you will indulge us a little bit of a break, considering we do this each and every week. We thank you for giving us that. We are rejuvenated and ready to go. Mosse, how you doing, man?
I am doing well. As you mentioned, today is January 4th, so we are well within the Happy New Year zone. But that is an eternal debate. What is the Happy New Year cutoff? If you see somebody in late January for the first time, can you say Happy New Year then? Or is there a certain date where the Happy New Year thing has gone by the wayside?
I don't look at it as a date. I look at it much more relative to the person that I am seeing, in that if I have not seen them in the new year or conversed or texted or any type of interaction with them, then I think it's completely appropriate for you to wish them a Happy New Year, because it's the first time that you are seeing it. Now, you get into the Februaries, whatever. Now, we are notorious, my family, notorious for when we do actually do our holiday, our Christmas card or anything like that, it ends up being in the February. And that's a whole nother debate about when is acceptable to send a holiday card after the case. But, you know, these are first world problems, as they say, Mosse. But yeah, I think if you get into February, then the Happy New Year thing loses any effect, even if, so my cutoff date would definitely be the end of January. You, what do you think?
I would even go mid-January. I don't know.
Okay.
You see somebody January 20-something and still wish them a Happy New Year. I don't know. I feel like you kind of missed the window on it.
Wow. All right. Now, we as we mentioned, we took the week off last week. We came to the end, and we don't really do year-end type of synopsis shows or best ofs or anything like that at the State of the Union. We might do that some point in the future. We just never really have done that. But I did want to just kind of give a coda to the year that was 2020. And I know we all look at it as in general, and certainly the general public out there, and the majority out there look at it with in a negative light, and because it was a historically crap year. But I was talking to my mother, and my mother's a poet, and she was mentioning something about her poetry group that she has, and one of the poets had in one of these Zoom calls that they had read a poem about, yes, 2020 was crap, and yet there was also incredible beauty that deserved to be celebrated, even if we didn't hear about it. And it's forever, no matter what we do, going to remember it as this historically dark and, as I said, sad, and for a lot of people, scary year. But also there is incredible beauty there, even though, like I said, we didn't hear about it. There were birds, there were marriages, there was love and art and ingenuity and kindness and milestones that were achieved, and humor and discovery and animals and food, etc. So there are beautiful things that will come to be associated with the year that is 2020. I know in the history books it will be written as this dark, sad, depressing, and scary year, but I think it is worth mentioning and pointing out that even in a year like this, there were wonderful things that happened. And so if you had those wonderful things that happened to you, don't be afraid to celebrate them. Not that you would. And I celebrate them. I celebrate them with you. But having said all that, I think we all look at 2021 and hope that things are going to be better. Now, a lot of times, Mosse, we talk about our television and our movie stuff. We're going to save that to later on a little bit in the show, because while we don't do necessarily look backs, what we did do this week, and we decided to do something when it comes to our TV and movie tastes and what 2020 was. So save that a little bit. But just in general, anything what you would like to tell the people out there in terms of interesting things that are happening right now in the world and life of David Mosse?
No, as you mentioned, I know we're going to save the TV stuff for later, but I did finally watch Ted Lasso the last couple of weeks. And then I watched, like many other people, the Wonder Woman movie over the holidays.
Oh, don't get me started on the Wonder Woman movie. Oh my God, 3.5 hours or whatever it was. I mean, come on, man. I mean, you know, my kingdom for an editor. Somebody just, I mean, all right. Anyway, Mosse, did you like it?
No. Well, I should say I'm not the best judge because I'm not a fan of comic book movies, so I don't like any of them. I was forced to see it given the company I was with. But felt longer than The Irishman, says Luis Aguilar.
Oh, pipe it in 2021, Luis Aguilar with the jokes. I get it.
Yeah. So I don't like any of these comic book movies, but I was told even by people who do generally like these movies that this was considered a bad one. So like, it's hard for me to distinguish between the good ones and bad ones. They're all kind of the same to me, but I heard that this was considered a massive disappointment.
Oh, I have no problem with the superhero or the comic book type of movies. Actually, some of them can be very, very good. And as a matter of fact, the first Wonder Woman was very, very good. And that's what made this one even worse. And this was one that went directly to streaming. As opposed, I mean, in normal times, it would have been a kind of a blockbuster type of well, I guess you can't be a blockbuster until you are a blockbuster, but given the reviews and then actually having seen it, I think the State of the Union here does not recommend Wonder Woman 84. The 84 thing was strange. It wasn't really good action, and it just dragged on, and it could have been a whole lot better. Anyway, Mosse, enough talk about Wonder Woman, although I love Wonder Woman. Oh my goodness, Wonder Woman. So many great memories. I digress. Ready to light this candle, my friend?
Let's do it.
All right. We're going to dive right into it. And we're going to start off with some doings when it comes to Major League Soccer. I know Major League Soccer isn't in business well, it's in business, but it's not in season right now. But still, all sorts of stuff coming out. And look, when one of the greatest players of all time, and certainly one of the legends and iconic type of players that is still playing right now in the form of Leo Messi, starts talking about your league and a connection to it, that is a good thing? Question mark, Mosse? Explain to the folks what happened here.
So Messi gave an interview last week, a lengthy interview to this Spanish program, La Sexta, to kind of update everybody on where his head's at right now. We all remember what occurred before the season when he sent the burofax and tried to leave Barcelona and was more or less forced to stay. And this time around, he struck a more conciliatory tone. He talked about his love for the club and how he feels much better about things. But nevertheless, he still left the door open for leaving. And he talked about how he is intrigued by the possibility someday of living in the United States and playing in Major League Soccer. It was interesting because in the interview, he talked about how, although he recognizes he has a privileged life, he does crave anonymity sometimes, and would be nice to be able to take his kids and go to the movies or go to the mall. And you know, I in watching that Maradona HBO documentary, I was struck by the claustrophobic nature of his life. It seemed like every time Maradona walked out the door in Naples or Buenos Aires, there was a crowd of people grabbing and clutching him. And Messi, I'm sure, deals with the same thing. And so Matias Almeida, who's Messi's countryman, who's now manager in MLS, he did come out and say, yeah, I get it. I do think, you know, if you've lived a life like Messi has in that pressure cooker for all those years, he probably does crave some peace and tranquility. And so it's sort of coming from that place, the appeal of MLS. But nevertheless, he said it, he's put it out there. And so, I mean, now it's got people thinking that Messi will eventually make his way to Major League Soccer. So what do you make of that?
Oh my goodness, Mosse. Okay. So no, we've talked before on the pod about how be careful what you wish for when some of these players that say, oh, I want anonymity, I want to be able to walk the streets. And then when when the height of privilege is taken away from some of these players and reality sets in, and you are ultimately treated like a regular person, sometimes that's that's not everything that it's cracked up to be from their perspective. Now, look, Messi is on a whole nother level, and even his version of normal is something that most of the world cannot even comprehend. While I do think that he would be afforded a more anonymity in the United States / Canada, I think there would be a curiosity, and I don't think it would be as comforting or as enjoyable as he may think it would be. I still think that there would be incredible interest. Now, the difference between someone like Messi and Maradona, as we talked about, is I do think that while there was incredible pressure and scrutiny and just a world bearing down on him when it came to Maradona, I think to a certain extent he craved that theater and he craved that drama and that platform. I think Messi, and I don't think it's actually played out, he has gone the other way, a much more private, introverted type of existence for one of the great stars. So that's all about the off the field type of stuff. But ultimately, he would be coming here to play soccer. I would love to see it. I mean, we have talked ad nauseum about the fact that this is a player who, from a very, very young age, was given this golden existence in this bubble that is La Masia, and then obviously playing his entire career up to now in that bubble of Barcelona. And while oftentimes in the back and forth between Messi and Ronaldo, I will cite the fact that Cristiano Ronaldo has gone multiple places and has had success. We have not seen that, okay, from a Messi. And not only would we see that in this type of scenario, but we would see it happening where it's not as, when Cristiano left Spain, it went to the best team in Italy. If Leo Messi went to MLS, and let's say he went to Miami, okay, that the parity that exists and is manufactured, he would not only just be being seen in a different jersey and in a different light, but in a league that is structured on parity, we would actually see what Messi looks like when he's playing not just with players that aren't of his level, but against other teams that are of equal and in certain cases superior level to him, and what that ultimately looks like. So I think that if this were to happen, it would be an incredible challenge to him. Now, the way he was talking about it seemed much more long-term, so I'm not expecting anything imminent, even though we know we're going to be talking about Messi and as it comes up to the end, and even as we're into this transfer window where theoretically he could sign a pre-contract out there. But it is interesting, and he also, I think, understands he wants to keep his options open and say good things about a league that certainly could entice him in the future, that not just for him, but for his family, like you said, would be something that he would enjoy.
Now, obviously, if Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo wants to come to MLS, they're going to be welcome, whatever their stated reason for coming is. But does it hit you funny on any level when you hear a big star say that the appeal of coming to the United States is precisely that people don't care about soccer as much here? Is that hit you kind of funny? Because, what we're all striving for is for the United States to become a rabidly passionate soccer nation like in Europe and South America. And so in a weird way, it's a little bit of a backhanded weird reason to say that's why you want to come here. Does it hit you funny on any level, or no, you actually don't want the United States to become like these other countries, and you're happy that stars can come here and live in peace and tranquility?
No, because I think it's an antiquated type of view of the American soccer community and the American soccer public when and the sport public. Now, look, I'm not here to say that the United States culture when it comes to sports and when it comes to soccer is anything in terms of mass or history relative to other countries and cultures, but it's a whole lot different. That's why I say you got to be really careful as to what your perception is versus what the reality is on the ground. And by the way, I don't have to tell anybody listening or watching that our country is this incredible melting pot. And so remember in what was it, Coming to America, where Eddie Murphy's character, who's a king, and he comes from this country, and nobody theoretically knows who he is, and he's walking through, I think it's the NASA Coliseum or something like that, after a hockey game or something, and this guy comes up to him and all of a sudden is on his knees and bowing, and the girl that he's with has no idea why this is happening. I think that you would see a lot more hero worship and recognition from not just the American soccer community, but I think the community in general than I think he anticipates or expects when it comes to something like that.
Now, as I mentioned, Messi did try to leave Barcelona before this season. He was linked with Manchester City, and there were stories that City were sort of concocting this long-term contract in which he would play X amount of years for Manchester City and then X amount of years for NYCFC. So if he went that route, that would more or less lock him into playing for NYCFC if he did eventually come to MLS. Other clubs that have been mentioned as possibilities, obviously the two LA teams, the Galaxy, who have this long tradition of attracting big stars, and also Inter Miami, given who their owner is, which if you want to segue to our next sort of big MLS related story that came out in the last 10 days or so, which was David Beckham making a big point of saying that in year 2 of Inter Miami, he's going to be a lot more involved, a lot more engaged. So what did you make of that story?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, like I said, I do see the teams. Look, Messi's not going to Columbus, okay? I mean, and look, that's the champions of MLS, but Messi, you know, maybe the Atlantas get thrown into there, and you know, the connection that he may or may not have with people within the club. You mentioned Matias Almeida and that type of stuff. But, you know, I think that if he's coming for the American adventure, he's going to look at what's happened before with other big time players. That connection to Miami, like you said, is, you know, it is there. Now, the David Beckham situation is interesting to me because the first question that I have is, well, where the hell have you been? It's your team, okay? It is David Beckham's Inter Miami. And look, I know firsthand what the involvement of David Beckham. And when we say David Beckham, while it's the individual, it's the team, okay? So when David Beckham gets involved, the David Beckham brand and team gets involved. And sometimes it can be an incredibly positive and to great effect. And sometimes it can't be. Now, you know, I was involved many, many years ago, and David obviously was a player, and this is a little bit of a different situation. But this is good news for Miami. This is good news for the league, to be quite honest with you. In any league, in any sport, you do not want an absentee type of owner. And I'm not suggesting that he was. You saw him. He did the rounds. He did the press. But if this is your team, and you are David Beckham with that type of power that you wield and leverage and the connections and all that kind of stuff, you should definitely, if you're that ownership group, you should be using that every chance that you possibly can. Because once again, as I told you, this is a reflection on the band of Beckham. And it looked and was ultimately, even though they made the playoffs, a failure in terms of what they did. And I guess in terms of living up to the expectations that we have. And a lot of those expectations, to be fair, were the association with David Beckham. So I think this is welcome news, but I am cautiously optimistic because is it a situation where he comes in and he, you know, steers this ship back in the right directions, or does he muddy up the waters further right now with his involvement? And is he the only cook in the kitchen? And is that cook really doing something that's going to push this team to that next level?
Yeah, there's a common criticism levied at American owners in Europe that they're not around enough. They live on the other side of the pond. They don't care. They treat it as a business venture more than a sporting venture. They don't really understand the club, the community. You hear that with the Glazers in Manchester United, Stan Kroenke in Arsenal, James Pallotta at Roma. You don't hear it as much with John Henry at Liverpool because they hired Jurgen Klopp and started winning all these trophies and became essentially the model club in Europe. But you hear it with these other guys, and Beckham is almost dealing with that the other way. Now, he would argue there were mitigating circumstances this past year with the pandemic, and also he would argue he made a point of staying away because he didn't want to hog the limelight. But what you're telling me is when things are quote unquote back to normal in MLS, you would like to see David Beckham at all the games, sitting in the owner's box, giving interviews about the team, looking like he's engaged. Like the optics do matter to you. You want to see a fully invested David Beckham.
They do. And specifically because it's David Beckham. And look, I don't make the rules. That's just the way that this team is looked at. It is looked at David Beckham's Inter Miami. And so if that's the case, if you're David Beckham, I would say, look, if I'm going to get yelled and screamed at or criticized for it, at least I want to have a say in what's going on. And so, yeah, I mean, I want all owners to be involved. Now, not to be, you know, making decisions that they are not capable of making. But, you know, this is one of the great players of the game. This is a player with incredible connections. This is a player that understands the game. And certainly a player much more so than than many other international players out there that has a fundamental understanding of what MLS is and what MLS isn't.
Now, the way he could tangibly affect the results on the field is by attracting a top coach and top players. And going into this 2020 season, a lot of people were underwhelmed by the Inter Miami roster. And what the Beckham camp tried to portray was that this was by design. They're taking a deliberative approach. They weren't swinging for the fences yet as far as signings. I have a couple of people in MLS who I know have said to me, like, no, they tried. They tried to lure a couple of big stars here right away from year one and just weren't able to. And the Beckham pull wasn't all that they thought it was going to be. So that's going to be interesting to see moving forward if he is able to attract the guys that people think, like Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo in the coming years. I mean, what do you think? Is there a chance that we might be overrating the Beckham pull or not?
No, I do think that there is a Beckham pull. But look, don't let anybody tell you that this was a soft launch from Inter Miami. And that was good. I wanted that. There are certain circumstances where I get why you have a soft launch. And look, they're also going to get a couple more bites at the apple here, because at some point we're going to come back into a much more of a normal type of year, and you'll be able to kick it off and have a normal type of season. And even though it's still a temporary type of scenario in Fort Lauderdale where they're playing, and that theoretically in the future there's going to be even another announcement and a stadium at some point in actual Miami and playing Miami. But this is not Minnesota. Okay. You can't afford, and I don't think that they did. And so, okay, they swung, but I got a great appreciation and respect for those that think big and are big and bold and arrogant. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Yeah, you'll get criticism, but that's okay. That's what big, bold, arrogant teams do. So you go right back to the drawing board and you figure it out. Now with a year under your belt and an understanding of more of what did work and what didn't work. But I don't think the expectations are any different next year, in that I look to this team to be competitive, absolutely competitive. But I look for this team to do things that are big and bold. I look for a continuation of the hard launch, whether it failed last year or not. Now, what David Beckham, his involvement now, quote unquote, his involvement now does kind of give you an opportunity to say, well, that was last year, and now we're really going to hunker down and we're really going to focus in on it, and I'm going to be involved now. And so you do get a reset, if you will. But look, this is Inter Miami. And from the moment that it was created and branded and trumpeted, it was my expectation, along with a lot of other people, that this was going to, like I said, be a potential super club because of the market, because of the ownership group, and because of the way that they talked about it. And I like that. And I hope they do live up to that. Look, if they do live up to that, it's not just good for Miami. It's not just good for Inter Miami. It's good for the league. I want that to happen. But it didn't happen last year, and I hope they don't regress. They can't regress. Mosse, any other MLS stuff do you want to talk about here?
Yeah, I mean, there's another wave of young Americans moving to Europe or being linked with moves to Europe. I mean, we could go through each of them individually if you want. FC Dallas have forged this partnership with Bayern Munich, so a lot of young FC Dallas players are now going to train with Bayern. The latest one is Tanner Tessman. You might recall Chris Richards actually impressed enough during one of these trials to get signed by Bayern Munich and is now playing with them. Brendan Aronson arrives at Salzburg. He'll play under Jesse Marsch there. Joe Scally has turned 18, so he can now move from NYCFC to Gladbach. A couple more that our producer Jeff Hernandez didn't include here, but are worth mentioning. Mark McKenzie, very close to a deal with Belgian side Genk. Although from what I read today, it's not completely done. So Celtic are still sniffing around, hoping they can maybe snatch him. And then Brian Reynolds, FC Dallas, being pursued by the likes of Roma and Juventus. You might recall he stepped in after Reggie Cannon left for Europe. So, we can go through them individually, but the larger point here is that people like Matt Doyle have been adamant that this group of Pulisic, Reina, McKinney, Adams, Dest, this is not a golden generation. This is the start of the new normal, and there are going to be waves and waves of this. And the U.S. has more or less figured out how to produce talent now, and Europe has bought into the U.S. talent. And so we're just going to have to get used to this. And it's going to become like Brazil and Argentina, where every offseason there's this whole new wave of players that move to Europe. Do you buy that? Do you like it? What do you make of all that?
Oh, I love it. I love that finally the thinking of the soccer world outside of the United States has caught up to the reality on the ground that exists. Because I believe that there's plenty of talent that has existed in Major League Soccer over the year that just hasn't had this moment in time, hasn't had the connections, hasn't had the infrastructure, hasn't had the eyeballs, and hasn't had, therefore, the credibility. And that has nothing to do necessarily with how talented they were, okay? It's not as if the U.S. has never produced talented players. We've done that for many, many years. But getting those talented players in situations where they can excel, or even just where they can be seen to excel, that's important. And having the people look at those as viable options. The interesting thing, Mosse, you mentioned a bunch of FC Dallas players. Look, FC Dallas has built their brand on developing young talent. The interesting thing when I see this is that there was this fear that MLS was going to become a feeder league and be an Ajax type of situation. The Ajax type of situation, and you even mentioned Genk and different teams. Usually what happens is you have these teams that within their league, in their country, are the perennial powers and favorites, even though they are feeders to the much bigger leagues and bigger teams out there. In this situation, where the relationship has been established with none other than Bayern Munich and FC Dallas, this is a team that is mediocre. Okay. Yes, they've had blips here or there, but for the most part, we don't look at them as one of the guiding lights when it comes to Major League Soccer, or as one of those big types of teams. And maybe that's what enables them to still compete and do what they are doing right now. Because if I'm on the outside, I'm looking at MLS. First thing I look at is, well, it's not about the best team, because that parity that exists mean that there's quality throughout. Can it be replicated now by other teams, and do other teams want to necessarily do what they are doing? But all in all, this is great news. This isn't bad for Major League Soccer. This isn't going to hurt Major Soccer. As a matter of fact, I think it's going to enhance the credibility, not just the credibility from outside, but even the credibility from inside. It's going to help, and I've already seen it help enhance our national team. And I think ultimately that this is not the succumbing of Major League Soccer to being a feeder league or a minor league type of scenario relative to the rest of the world. This is just a recognition that they want to participate in the world market out there. It's good business, and that they can participate it, and they can flip some of these assets, and they can make a lot of money, 2, 3, 4 times their investment, that then goes back into retaining talent or providing opportunities and monies to bring talent in from elsewhere. So I think I have a hard time looking at this as bad for Major League Soccer. I don't know. What about you?
No, I agree with you. Certainly for the time being, as we've discussed, if the stated goal is still to someday become the best league in the world, then at some point down the road in the future, you're going to have to revisit the strategy and try to hold on to players. But for now, I think MLS is being smart and sort of playing the game and accepting its role in the global landscape as more of a selling league. So yeah, I think this is all good stuff. Yeah, I'm curious about this Tanner Tessman. Did I say Taylor Tessman before by accident?
No, I think you said Tanner.
Well, because it's
hey, look, just because he's going to Europe to train with Bayern Munich doesn't mean we get to pronounce his name right.
Well, it's only because Taylor Twellman is the one that I first saw tweeting about this, so I sort of have Taylor in the head when reading this. No, so yeah, I'm curious to see this Tanner Tessman one, because I do like him as a player, and that would be pretty neat if another young American got signed by Bayern Munich. So
I want to mention something though, because I'm going to talk later on, way later in the show, when I do one for the road about college and education and stuff. But I do want to mention that as we see and as we send more and more players, and by the way, more and more young players, really, really young. I mean, you're talking sometimes about players that have barely even made a dent when it comes to the first team in Major League Soccer. As we are sending them over, obviously they have been scouted, and there is a belief either in what they are right now, or a belief in what they are, more likely a belief in what they're going to be in a few years. We have to be cognizant of the fact that they're not all going to succeed. All right. And it's not all going to be wine and roses for everybody. And that, once again, is not necessarily reflective of how good that individual player is, how good the team that they are coming from is in terms of developing. But it's not all going to be the success stories that we see out there. Doesn't mean that we don't stop doing it, but just a word of caution, because I'll be interested to see how some of these players that we pump up and prime for this move to Europe, either because they've had a stellar period, albeit a short period of success in MLS, like a Brendan Aronson, or guys that are just right out of the chute and they just see something in them and they want to get them really early and they anticipate. I'm talking about the other teams over there that are going out there and are very, very naive. And as I said, young, and this is sometimes their first experience away from anything that they have known when it comes to home. It's going to be interesting. And I'll talk more about that later on in the show. Anything else, Mosse?
And one last thing for you. For people who aren't familiar with Genk, which is the club that Mark McKenzie has been linked with, they are an incredible stepping stone club. Every year when they're in the Champions League or the Europa League, invariably I see this article, what would the Genk starting 11 have looked like if they held on to all their players? And it's truly amazing. They have this fabled youth system, produced De Bruyne and Courtois and Benteke and Origi and Yannick Carrasco, and then other young players that have passed through there on their way to bigger things like Koulibaly and Milinkovic-Savic and Leon Bailey and Wilfred Ndidi. So that's actually a very decent landing spot for Mark McKenzie, a club that knows how to develop young talent and then ship them off to bigger things. That would be actually a very smart move for him, I think.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a stepping stone for Mark McKenzie. I think he has much higher aspirations, and I think that he can achieve those. Anything else MLS-wise, Mosse?
No, that's it.
Okay. I will just say this before we go, that the league and the Players Association are there going to be a lot of stories coming out because of the situation right now where we don't know what the next season is going to look like. The league doesn't know what next season is going to look like. The force majeure clause, which is the act of God clause that potentially is going to be invoked here, that's going to throw everything into a tizzy here when it comes to the contractual obligation between these two parties. We don't know, but it's going to be something that we're going to keep an eye on as we go forward, because the players need the league and the league need the players. And at some point they got to meet somewhere in between. I just don't know what point that is. And in a 2021, your guess is as good as mine. All right, Mosse, we're going to take a real quick break. When we come back, we'll look at the rest of the world. Don't go anywhere. All right, we're back. We're going to take a look at the rest of the world going on, either on or off the field. Some interesting stories out there. Mosse, what are we looking at first here? What do you want to look at first?
Well, a big game this weekend a lot of people had their eye on was the Chelsea-Manchester City match in England, which City won convincingly. Frankly, Chelsea got off lightly with it only being 3-1. On balance of play, that game could have been 5 or 6-0 because City were actually quite wasteful throughout, and Chelsea scored in stoppage time with pretty much the only chance they created the whole game, Hudson-Odoi. So that scoreline actually flattered Chelsea for what was just a completely embarrassing performance. Before we get into the other aspects of the game, there were two Americans prominently involved. Zack Steffen started in goal for City because Ederson is out with quarantining because of COVID precautions, and then Pulisic started for Chelsea. Steffen didn't have much to do throughout the game. He did have one embarrassing moment early on. I'm not sure if he thought that ball deflected off a Chelsea player or wasn't an intentional pass, or he was so nervous he forgot the rule. What did you make of that? But that was a bit of a bizarre moment.
Well, like you said, he had next to nothing to do the entire game. I guess you take the win, but the only thing that he had to do, I mean, you had one job, okay? And look, it's not fair to him because he was playing in front or behind a team that was just phenomenal, and the possession was incredible in the way that they went about it, and rarely was he even threatened. And so whether it was a brain fart or he just legitimately just didn't recognize what was going on, and whether it's because he doesn't play regularly or not. Look, all I care about is that he was on the field. He was he is I think arguably, but I think a lot of people argue our number one goalkeeper when it comes to the U.S. And when he went back to Manchester City, there was a question of, all right, how many games is he actually going to play? And he's getting the cup games and doing all that, which is fine and well. But this was an actual EPL performance, even though he didn't have to do a whole lot. So that's on the one side. And I think ultimately it was good for him that first off, they called on him, that he got the win, that he got the clean sheet. And, I had a little anomaly there. And I do think it was an anomaly there. And they cleaned it up. The other side, actually, from an American perspective, I thought Christian Pulisic was incredible. I mean, I know at times it looked like he was trying to do everything himself, but taking on 2 and 3 players at a time, and his quickness and his 1-2 touches and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, look, if you watch that game, a game in which Chelsea got completely destroyed, I'm hard pressed to find anybody that would watch that game and not single out Christian Pulisic as a bright spot. Now that's not always the case when Christian Pulisic plays, but in this game, I actually appreciated and respected the fact that he constantly went searching for the ball. He constantly was doing what he does so well, which is take players on. And at times it was 2-3 players. At times he would get, ultimately that last guy would nick the ball or do whatever. But it wasn't as if he had options up there that you said, well, why is he trying to do everything himself or he's doing too much? I thought he was doing as much and maybe even more than no, he was definitely doing more than anybody else out there. I don't know. What did you think of the performances?
No, I tend to agree. I think an even better example of what you're talking about is the game against Arsenal on Boxing Day, which they also lost handily, but he was Chelsea's best player by a mile that day and was the only one making things happen. And yeah, this game too. Now, this game, I thought he got dragged down a little bit into the overall sort of malaise of the team, but still, you're right. He's the only guy that even looks capable of conjuring up anything. I tell you, other than Neymar, there are very few players I see in the world that have as quick a first step as he does, where if he gets a defender in space, he does that little jab step where you just know he's going to blow by him. And then, as you mentioned, more defenders converge and maybe he tries to take too many on and he loses the ball. But that first guy, it's always a given he's going to blow by him. There are very few players in the world that have that quality. And so, yeah, I come away, even in what was ostensibly a disastrous day for Chelsea, to me, his reputation is intact. I mean, you're right. He's the only guy in that team that tries to do anything.
But here's the problem, Mosse, okay? The way we are talking about this performance from Christian Pulisic is, you mentioned Gank or something like that, of a player who shines despite the fact that he or she is not playing with the best players or is playing against vastly superior opposition and still being able to show. This is Chelsea. This is Chelsea with all the talent that they have, with all the money that they have spent. So are we looking at this as, I mean, I'll say it right now, Christian Pulisic is too good for this Chelsea team. And his talents are being wasted right now at Chelsea with this Chelsea team, the way that they have it. With that, Mosse, shall we talk about who is in charge of this Chelsea team and whether this is, are they going to continue on, or is Christian Pulisic going to be faced with a new manager?
Well, first off, Jeff Hernandez, if you're listening, that's your Twitter clip there. Christian Pulisic is too good for Chelsea. Let's run that up the flagpole and see how folks in England react.
Definitely getting written down the notes right now. You'll see that on social.
But yeah, no. So Chelsea, it's only 4 points from their last 6 Premier League games. They've slipped to 8th in the table. So yeah, a lot of pressure on Frank Lampard. Now, Lampard has tried very hard to sell this. He acts like last season doesn't even count. And mind you, he actually got a lot of praise for his work last season. He inherited the team under a transfer ban, couldn't sign anybody, he lost Eden Hazard, and still they finished in the top 4, got to the FA Cup final, got to the knockout stages of the Champions League before losing to Bayern. No shame in that. And yet he treats last season like it was a non-year. And now this is the first season where he's actually been able to sign players and bring in his guys and start to implement his ideas. So in his view, he shouldn't be under any pressure because it's much too early here. And this is really the first season of kind of a new project. And so give me time. And we're not supposed to be winning the Premier League this season. So he's going to great lengths to sort of downplay things. But yeah, people aren't buying it. People feel like last season was the stepping stone year to implement your ideas. And now with the talent you have, this team should be better. It should be competing for major trophies. And it sounds like by your shaking of your head that you're more on that wavelength.
Yeah. I mean, you shouldn't buy it. Okay. This is somebody who has already been given opportunities that others wouldn't be given because of his legendary status with the club. And look, I don't begrudge him that. You use what you got at your disposal to figure out ways to get opportunities. But as I always say, Mosse, all right, as the great Janet Jackson so eloquently put, what have you done for me lately? That he is arguably the greatest blues legend in history. That counts for little ultimately when you are managing. And by the way, don't worry about tarnishing that reputation. He will forever be that legend, regardless of what happens here. But this is ultimately about results. And one of the reasons why he is that legendary player is he knew every time he stepped on the field that it was ultimately about results. And so now in his capacity, with all the things that we mentioned, all the money that's been spent, all the talent that they have, a solid and very respectable, and some would say really good first season, despite some of the challenges that he had. This is not good enough. And to say, well, you need to give him time. Why would he get time any more so than anybody else? We know that they churn and burn him over there, and that he is that legend. I don't think that absolves him from the responsibility of this team, which I think is underperforming and should be much better.
It's interesting. There have been less managerial changes during this pandemic. Rory Smith wrote a piece about this recently, and he talked about how there are two reasons brought on by the pandemic. Number one is financial. Teams are in dire straits right now, so they don't want to be paying multiple managers. Number two, the fact that the stadiums are empty, so it makes it not as toxic of an atmosphere if you're struggling. I mean, that Chelsea-Manchester City game, I mentioned it was an embarrassing performance by Chelsea. And had that been in front of like a packed Stamford Bridge, the fans would have been booing and chanting Lampard out. And if Roman Abramovich is watching that, that does seep into your brain. It kind of influences your perception of the situation. And so managers aren't having to deal with that right now, which is one of the reasons why you've said during our MLS telecast, if you're going to be bad, now is not a bad time to be bad. And so, yeah, I mean, what do you make of that? Do you think? And then, the other reason Rory gave was that he just thinks clubs are just generally becoming more patient and just feel like, giving manager time. There's the example of Klopp, who it took a few years to kind of get it completely figured out at Liverpool. And there's now this sense that owners are figuring out that this sort of trigger happy approach doesn't work and that you do need to give managers more time. So what do you make of all that?
All right. I mean, eventually somebody's going to get it right if you just keep giving them time. Look at Ole. I mean, now Ole goes from he needs to be gone to, oh, he's finally got it right and well done. Good patience over there at Manchester United. No, I understand that there are moments where you have to look at long-term and you have to, but your analysis of that long-term decision or that decision to give somebody the benefit of the doubt and to have patience is relative to the fact that you see it heading in the right direction. And by the way, that doesn't mean that there can't be steps back along the way, but ultimately you see that energy heading this ship in the right direction right now. And you see in that manager that you have somebody that is going to be able to be successful. And to your point, the assessment at this point is also both for player and coaches, to be quite honest with you, is will they be able to do it when it does return to that normal type of situation and that pressure? Is this player playing well right now because the pressure isn't on him or her? Is this coach doing well or not doing well because that natural environment that they maybe were hired in is no longer there? It doesn't change the fact that if this continues on, your tools as both a player and as a manager are going to be relative to this new situation that we're dealing with. And so you got to be able to deal with the fact that there's nobody in the stadiums. You got to be able to deal with the fact that you may not have players because of Corona or all these different things. That's how you are going to be. That's how you are going to be assessed. But Frank Lampard may very well come good at some point. But is that a reason just to give him more and more time to figure out when that ultimately happens? I mean, like you said, there's plenty of talent there. All right. There's lots of money being spent. So at some point it's going to click in, but is it going to be the function of a coach or a manager that has this plan and that at that point, then they kick on? I don't know.
And it's interesting. The name being mentioned by the English media, if they were to get rid of Lampard now, is Thomas Tuchel, who is suddenly available because he himself got sacked by PSG over the holidays and replaced by Mauricio Pochettino. That was the other big coaching news we should spend a second on. Just to do sort of the obituary on Tuchel and PSG. I know a lot of people think it's because they're third in Ligue 1. It was sort of a results-based sacking. I don't feel that way. It was more of an intangible thing. Him and Leonardo just never clicked. He was hired by the previous sporting director. From the moment Leonardo took charge, you could tell he doesn't rate Tuchel that highly as a manager. He didn't think that team was that well coached. He felt like they were winning in spite of him and that PSG could do better there. If it was just results-based, there's some mitigating circumstances this year. They had a huge COVID outbreak at the beginning of the campaign. They've been murdered by injuries. They're only a point off the top in Ligue 1. And of course, they're going to eventually get their guys back and rip off some victories and win Ligue 1. That would have happened with Tuchel. It's going to happen with Pochettino. And, as far as the Champions League goes, he got to the final last season. And this season, he topped the group with United and Leipzig. So there's not really a results-based reason to fire him. More so, it's because Leonardo just didn't like the feel of the situation. And his contract was going to be up at the end of the season. They weren't going to keep him anyway. They had their eye on Pochettino. So they figured, let's make this move now so we don't miss out on Pochettino. Somebody else might grab him first. So that's my read on that situation. So now the question is, I've seen a lot of articles the last few days, is Pochettino a good fit? And frankly, what is a good fit at PSG? It's such an odd club to manage. Yeah. And I've talked about how when the Qatari owners bought the club, the first manager they hired was Carlo Ancelotti, but they weren't ready to win the Champions League yet. Ancelotti, after one full season there, got an offer from Real Madrid. He felt like he couldn't turn down, and he went off to Real Madrid. And since then, PSG have interestingly, for a club that we all think is ostensibly obsessed with winning the Champions League, they've opted for managers who have no Champions League pedigree and who are more tacticians, guys like Laurent Blanc, Unai Emery, Thomas Tuchel. When you kind of feel like that situation is screaming for an Ancelotti, a Zidane, more of a player's coach who knows how to handle stars, who has a knack for winning Champions League titles, who's not fussy about tactics and will just kind of adjust his system to the players he has. And so in steps Pochettino, who at least did get to a Champions League final, but has never won a trophy in his managerial career. And I do view as something of a tactician. So I don't know, Pochettino, PSG, how did that hit you? Is that a weird fit to you? Or,
No, I do agree with you that the never-ending search for what this person is, or even if this person exists, that can find a way with plenty of money, plenty of talent, plenty of ambition to figure it out. I mean, so I'm running through the list of people out there that kind of fit your. I mean, look, at some point, Klopp's going to go someplace else, right? And he's going to want to go someplace that, having done everything, will give him the opportunity to do something that hasn't been done. So, and he's certainly of that ilk, right? That is something that I don't think they have really had before. So, I mean, Pochettino, I guess it never really floated my boat, Pochettino, to be quite honest with you.
My dad agrees with you. He's always found Pochettino a bit overrated by the English media and doesn't get all the fuss about him. So my dad is not that impressed by this hire. So you and him are kind of.
Oh my goodness! All right, what we got some Cristiano talk here, Mosse?
Yes. So this past weekend, Juve thumped Udinese 4-1. 2 of the goals courtesy of Cristiano Ronaldo. And so he reaches 758 official goals in his career for club and country, which surpasses Pele. And you might recall a couple of weeks ago, Messi surpassed Pele for most official goals with one club, 644. He reached with Barcelona. Pele scored 643 for Santos. Now, all this stuff has drawn an interesting reaction in Brazil. I want to ask you first, before we get into this, when I say the name Pele, what's your reaction? Are you a believer in the legend of Pele? Are you a Pele denier? Are you an agnostic? Do you feel like I never watched the guy play, so how could I have a strong opinion one way or the other? Like when you hear the name Pele, what reaction does that elicit?
Well, first off, of the teams that he was associated with, I will always first and foremost associate him with Brazil. Okay, and so I think his legend and legacy. This is even coming from an American where we know the association with the Cosmos, but for me, his legend and legacy was built in terms of what he did in the international game. Okay. For me, that's the way that it hits me. I mean, I don't know how other people feel out there and what they associate with him, but are there people out there that don't buy the legend or somehow think that time has distorted actually how good he was or the goals that he scored?
No, there absolutely are. It's, I mean, listen, to give a little context here, in fairness to Pele, in 1969, he was minding his own business in his late 20s, still scoring goals in sort of the natural flow of his career. And a statistician in Brazil at the time surfaced and said, hey, I crunched the numbers on it, and he's approaching 1,000 goals. And the media picked it up and made it a big thing. And so in November of 1969, he scored his quote unquote 1,000th goal. And then if you count from there, his total ends up being 1,280 something in his career. And it wasn't Pele at first who made a fuss about it. It was others that made a fuss about it around him. However, over the years, he has kind of adopted that number and has brought it up constantly in interviews as like the foremost evidence that he's the greatest player of all time. And there is this younger generation that doesn't buy into the Pele stuff at all. If you search Pele's name on Twitter, you'd be amazed at the vitriol and people who think he's a fraud and overrated. And so people have looked at that and said, like modern statisticians have looked at it and said, okay, let's have a look here and see how many real goals this guy actually scored. And that Pele total has actually become a source of derision because it includes a lot of goals in friendlies and exhibition games and tournaments that don't exist anymore. So people have taken a scalpel to that number, and they've come out with official numbers that are much lower than that, to the point where now Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo are surpassing him. And people in Brazil, the whole thing is kind of rubbing them the wrong way because they think it's coming from a place of trying to diminish Pele. Yeah. And so they're pushing back against these numbers, and people are mocking Brazil's numbers, and it's turned into a whole thing. And I don't know, what do you make of it?
Well, first off, this evidently is a Brazilian thing, because I remember going through this with Romario, right? We did a whole thing. There was a thing with Romario and the amount of goals that he did or didn't score. And are they counting his under 8 goals that he scored or whatever, so they're all great players. I told you time and time again, this game that we play in is what would Messi have been had he played back in the 70s, or what would Pele have been had he played in the 2010s or something like that. A good player is a good player. Okay. Good players adapt, and they figured out. I truly believe that if you were a good player, regardless of era and time, you would figure it out, and you would be good, maybe even great, and you would live up to it. The amount of, if there are people out there that are dismissing Pele, I would also, and this, when we talked about the death of Diego Maradona, one of the things that we talked about, and it absolutely applies, maybe even more so for Pele. They played at a time where you say, oh yeah, he played at a different time. Well, back in that time, they were trying to kill you as goal scorers, as attacking players. And by the way, the laws back then kind of allowed them to at least maim you severely, whether they killed you or not, or whether there was protruding bone, was the question. So I would certainly die on the hill that Pele is arguably the greatest player of all time, regardless of the goals. I mean, the goal number really doesn't matter to me. I don't get caught up in this. So when Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo, they were always going to be in the conversation for the greatest all time, regardless of what the goal totals are. I should be quite honest, I don't even look at the goal totals, because it's such a very different type of environment that they were playing in and growing. I mean, if Pele happened today, he would probably be in Europe. Okay. He would have spent a lot of time in Europe, because that's just the way that, he would kind of have done what Neymar did, I guess. So yeah, it's just a very apples and oranges type of comparison.
The argument in Brazil, not to belabor this point, the argument in Brazil is that people who don't have a feel for Brazilian football in the 60s are viewing things through like a 2020 prism, not understanding that clubs back then played a lot more friendlies than they do today. Pele was such a worldwide draw that Santos spent like a big chunk of the year traveling around the world and playing in friendlies against the top clubs around the world, the Real Madrids and Barcelonas. And although those are quote unquote friendlies, they were matches that were taken very seriously, and you can't just ignore those goals and pretend they didn't happen. And so that's sort of, I think that the numbers emanating from Brazil are probably inflated, and there is some stuff in there that's silly, but I feel like some of this other stuff it's gone too much the other way, where, like I said, people are just taking a scalpel, and anything that doesn't fit neatly into sort of a 2020 prism, if it's a competition that might've been a big deal at the time in Brazil, but doesn't exist anymore, then that doesn't count. And so you get into this, I don't know, there's just a lot of gray areas there, and it's tough to determine how many quote unquote actual real goals Pele scored. But it sounds like you're nonplussed by the whole thing.
We all know that when it really comes to scoring goals, it's Robin Lewandowski that's ultimately going to go down as the greatest ever.
But like I said, the younger generation that wants to put Messi and Ronaldo above him anyway now has the sort of statistical evidence to do so, I guess. And it should be noted, this whole discrepancy over Pele's goal totals is going to affect a strictly Brazilian thing too, because according to FIFA, Pele has 77 career international goals. Neymar is in second place at 64. And Neymar's 28. He's about to turn 29. So he's well on pace to break that. Frankly, if he hadn't had the injuries he's had the last 2 or 3 years, he might have broken that already. So it's just delayed the inevitable. But he's going to surpass that number of 77. And so the whole world is going to be, because it's Neymar, I don't know if celebrating is the word, but they're going to acknowledge that Neymar has surpassed Pele and become Brazil's all-time leading scorer, except in Brazil, because the Brazilian Federation's number for Pele is 95. They count also. Yeah, I know. It's a crazy discrepancy. They count the certain matches that are FIFA treats as exhibition games that weren't real games, in which like Brazil before a major tournament would sometimes play friendlies against club teams to prepare. And so FIFA doesn't count that, but the Brazilian Federation does. So you get into all these gray areas there, but so it's going to be weird that the whole world is going to be acknowledging the fact that Neymar just surpassed Pele, except in Brazil, people are going to cling to this fact. No, he's nowhere close yet. The number is 95.
Well, I mean, if the last couple of months has taught us anything, is that, counting matters, and you can come up with different answers when it comes to how you count things. So, all right, Mosse, one more thing over here. And actually, I think this is going to be a South America centric type of segment, even though we kind of call it taking a look over in Europe. We're going to go right back over there because I know you made a point of saying that you wanted to talk about the Copa Libertadores, right?
Yeah, I haven't mentioned this competition all year. I do want to get a quick bit on it in here, but we've reached the semifinal stage of the Copa Libertadores. Now, this is the 2020 Copa Libertadores, but because of the lengthy stoppage due to COVID, it's now spilled over into January of 21. So the semifinals are this week and next week, and then the final is in late January. The two semifinals are both Brazil versus Argentina matchups, Santos against Boca Juniors, and then the other one is Palmeiras against River Plate. Incidentally, it's the third straight year that the semifinals have been two Brazilian clubs and two Argentinian clubs. And Tim Vickery has written about that, expressing concern that CONMEBOL made some format changes recently that have sort of exacerbated the gap between those two countries and everybody else. And he thinks it's gotten to a point where it's a bit farcical and needs to be looked into, that you can't just have two countries dominating this competition to such a degree. But nevertheless, two very enticing matchups. I'm looking forward to them. A lot of history in that Santos-Boca matchup. It is Pele's team against Maradona's team. Maradona obviously just passed away. Boca are trying to sort of win this competition in his honor. These two teams met famously in the 1963 Copa Libertadores final, which Pele and Santos won. And then Boca returned the favor in the 2003 final, beating Santos thanks to a young Carlos Tevez. Boca are now led by an old Carlos Tevez, who is still around there, amazingly enough. And then the other one, as I mentioned, Palmeiras River Plate, very good as well. Now, listen, I'll be rooting hard for the Brazilian clubs, but I'm also fully aware that the matchup, that all the neutrals, all the hipsters, people like Grant Wall, who because of one bus ride 25 years ago, fancy themselves South American football experts, the matchup they all want to see is Boca River, and their appetite was whetted even more this past weekend because those two teams met in an Argentinian domestic cup match, and it was an absolute thriller, 2-2, great game. So the prospect of them meeting again is very enticing to people. I get it. Remember, they met in the 2018 final. The first leg at the La Bombonera was 2-2, and then there was all that crowd trouble ahead of the second leg. The game ended up getting moved to the Bernabeu in Madrid, where Pity Martinez and River won 3-1 in extra time. This time around, the final would also be at a neutral venue, but not because of any crowd trouble. CONMEBOL have since changed the format to a one-off neutral venue final, and this one is at the Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro. So that would be sweet for Argentinians if Boca and River face off at the Maracanã. Of course, it would be empty stadium, unfortunately. So, I mean, we'll talk about this in the coming weeks. Next week I'll review the first legs, and after that the second legs, and then we'll ramp up to the final, especially if it's Boca River. So I don't want to dig into it too much here, but
all right, but I got one question for you though. When it comes to this, and yet, like you said, we will deal with it. I do want River Boca, so but I've never been accused of being a hipster, so I'll take that. So Grant and I are on the same page when it comes to something like that. But my question was, and I think you mentioned it earlier, when it comes, was it Tim Vickery? I don't know who you were talking about that had expressed concerns. I don't see this as a problem right now, but maybe I'm missing something in terms of the structure right now where it hamstrings other countries and other leagues when it comes to this. So just give us a little primer about why that argument would be made when you have, even the semifinal, while it's still the same two countries, these are, some of the preeminent type of clubs that you have down there.
Yeah, I mean, Vickery is concerned by the lack of parity. He sort of sees what's going on in Europe and the sort of super club era we're living in, and he doesn't want South America to move in the same direction. Part of the charm of this competition is that you used to get like a Colombian, Uruguayan, Chilean team there every now and then and give it a different flavor. And if it's just Brazilians and Argentinians every year meeting in the semifinals and the final, that's going to get a bit tedious. So, I mean, that's his point.
Got it. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that going forward to see if the hipsters are rewarded or the Brazilians are rewarded. All right, we're going to take another quick break here. When we come back, time for Ask Alexi. Don't go away. All right, we're back, and it's time. Oh, yes, it's time. The first Ask Alexi of 2021. That time in the pod when you ask us questions or you send us concerns or comments out there and you use that hashtag Ask Alexi or Ask Mosse. We get a bunch of them each and every week. We go through, we find some good ones that we think that you're going to enjoy. And we have done that again this week. What do the people want to know this week, Mosse?
First up, CDJR. Scoring on a former team. Can you celebrate the goal? Seems like one of those unwritten rules that is okay in some situations, but not others.
Oh, God. It drives me nuts when players score and then hold back some sort of celebration out of some sort of, what they would call respect for their former team. It's performative BS is what it is, okay? It is rarely genuine, and it comes from a place oftentimes of just fear, I guess. I think you're cheating. I think you're cheating yourself. I think you're cheating your team. I think you're cheating the supporters of that team. And I think you're cheating the people that pay your salary and that have decided that you are worthwhile of a place on that team. So I don't like it. I don't see it remotely disrespectful for a player, oftentimes whose sole job and the reason why they have made a career, or maybe even the reason why they have been legends at the team that they are now playing against, for them to score a goal and to celebrate it. It is the hardest thing to do in our game, and to diffuse that moment of ecstasy and of climax because out of some sort of tribute or respect to your former team. I don't get it. And look, I know people are saying that, but you probably never had the affinity and the affection and the connection to a team out there that would ever make you possibly do it. Or they're saying you didn't score any goals. All true, but I just think it reeks of just of self-serving. And I think in a certain way, it does the opposite of what you're trying to have it achieve. I think you are disrespecting the game, and I think you're disrespecting the opponent that you claim to hold so high when you do something like that. I don't know. What do you think, Mosse?
I 100% agree with you. It's funny. I live a pretty peaceful Twitter existence. I don't tweet that often. Very few people care about what I have to say, and the few that do like me, and I tweet pretty non-controversial things. So,
what's that like, Mosse?
I have generally pleasant interactions on Twitter. The one time where I've gotten a little bit of a window into your world was when I tweeted something about how I think this whole not celebrating a goal against your former team is stupid. And I got absolutely hammered from people who, that's because you don't have any class. And I don't know. I just don't see any equivalent in other sports. Like, you know, if LeBron James hits a buzzer beater against the Cavs, he's allowed to pump his fist and smile and be happy. If a guy scores a touchdown against his former team, he's allowed to celebrate it. You know, of course, you don't want to taunt anybody and be disrespectful about it. But my God, a guy scores a goal and he has to act like he's upset about it. He can't smile and run around and pump his fist and be happy. I just think it's the silliest thing. The idea that that's disrespectful to his former team. I agree with you 100%. This is just a silly tradition that needs to stop.
But it is, I mean, it is an unwritten rule. We see it time and time again. And, you know, especially in this day and age where players move about so much and they go from team to team to team, it does get a little rich when you see it done. All right. What else, Mosse?
Next up, Preki lives. Leeds picking a fight with the media. Why bother? Nothing to gain.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, this was a huge story, and actually, it continues to be a big story. One of the Amazon pundits over there, and Amazon, for those for people that don't know, is a huge broadcaster when it comes to the EPL over there in England. So Amazon broadcasts EPL games, and so one of the pundits on Amazon is a woman by the name of Karen Carney, and she, like we all do in the business, after the game, made comments about Leeds. Now, Leeds, as we know, and in the weeks and the years that we've been around, we talk about them because they are good content. They are fascinating in terms of what they do on the field, what they don't do on the field. Obviously, in Bielsa and their history and what they are trying to do, and they give us all sorts of content. You know, she made a comment relative to Leeds being promoted last year, and how the situation with the pandemic and the COVID situation may have helped in that process. Please correct me if I'm wrong here, Mosse, in anything that I'm saying here. Look, it was a provocative, I thought, really interesting, and but also a subjective type of comment. Something that she's paid to do, something that I'm paid to do, something that all of us are paid to do. Having said that, Leeds United, and you mentioned Twitter earlier, Leeds United decided that this was not something that they agreed with. You know, they have their opinions, and they certainly felt like they wanted to defend the work of this team, and that it was unfair and unjust and not right to say that it was done relative to the pandemic and COVID. All right, fine. They decided to tweet that out and or tweet out their defense of their team. The problem is that, as you know, Mosse, and even though you've had a very small exposure to it, Twitter can be incredibly explosive and incredibly divisive, and the vitriol that can come out sometimes from what seems to be an innocuous type of statement can be legendary. And that the club is defending themselves against a criticism and an opinion of a pundit, okay, that invited a whole lot of not constructive criticism, not even banter, just some real horrible type of comments to this pundit. When the comment came out from Leeds, I said, they're defending themselves, and I looked at it as benign. Okay, we are in this business to give our opinions, and I do in no way, shape, or form believe that I am special or I am protected by the fact that I'm a pundit from anybody disagreeing with me, including the very people, if they are individuals, or the very entities, if they are a club or an association or anything out there that I'm being critical of, defending themselves in the public sphere. And whether you like Twitter or not, it is the public sphere. And so turnabout is fair play. And that's the way that I believe it. It has to be, okay? Now, there are those that think that this was beyond the pale and that they should have known that this was going to invite the type, not criticism, but well beyond that she experienced. She has since left Twitter. Twitter is not for the faint of heart, as you know, and she's probably going to be better for that, for not having to deal with that. But I did not. Was it designed in its intent to create the situation that it did and to ultimately hurt somebody in the way that it did? No, I don't think so. But I also don't think that a club should let something that they feel that they disagree with just go. Now, if they do, it's just going to go off into the ether and fade away. And sometimes you're just highlighting it. And really, you know, what you're doing is engaging people that otherwise wouldn't even know about it. But, you know, I'm okay with clubs defending themselves and the individual players or the results or a situation that they have. I don't know, Mosse. Am I being am I off base, or am I being insensitive to the situation?
Well, first off, I know that this isn't really the issue, but the soccer geek in me does want to analyze the soccer merits of what she said. Mm-hmm. And I actually think she made a very fair point. And I am the biggest Marcelo Bielsa fan in the world, but even I acknowledge he does have a style of play that's physically taxing, and his teams have tended to fade over the course of seasons, including in his first campaign at Leeds, where they topped the table for much of the campaign and then faded down the stretch and didn't get promoted. And all she was saying was they're doing pretty well in the Premier League. It's going to be interesting to see how they fare over the course of the season, because she brought up last season, right around the time where Bielsa teams usually start to fade. The pandemic hit, the season shut down for several months, and then when they came back, they were fresh and played very well and got promoted. And so, you know, to say they got promoted because of COVID maybe wasn't the most like artful way to put it, but she was just saying it was perhaps a contributing factor, and I don't have a big issue with that. And I don't know, man, maybe a team's official Twitter page, I feel like it's supposed to behave with a little bit more like decorum. If she said something that really like was offensive towards a club and they want to push back and say, but just expressing a soccer opinion about the team, do you want your official Twitter account like in this trolly sort of tone mocking a reporter because you disagree with I don't know, maybe again, that gets back to this larger question about Twitter. I just recoil a little bit at just the trolly like aspect of it, but maybe you're just more used to it than me. So that
I probably am. I'm probably more used to it. I probably have a thicker skin. And I mean, look, earlier this podcast, I said that Christian Pulisic is too good for Chelsea. If Chelsea came out on their official Twitter handle and said, no, that's not the case. We have incredible players. You're just an American. You have no idea. And you're biased or, whatever to defend themselves. That's fair game. That's fine. I have no problem with them doing that. And by the way, if that were to happen, you know, all the Chelsea and Frank Lampard supporters and England supporters would jump on and go
I
crazy.
think that would be weird. I think if Chelsea fans hear that, what you said, and want to argue with you about it, that's one thing. I think the team's official Twitter account should sort of rise above that and understand that they're.
Oh, I agree. If I'm running that Twitter account, I get it, because here's the problem. If you go and try to put out every single one of those fires, that's all you will be doing, because especially over in England where it's on a constant 24/7 type of thing. Had they just let this go, it would have gone away. They made it something bigger than it was. But I also part of me says, you know, there's times where you do have to stand up. And if you truly feel that, and once again, it's not that you feel, and they've since said, you know, they have respect for her. They have invited her to the grounds. You know, they're going to do everything they possibly can. They have not taken down their response. And they've taken plenty of flack out there from a lot of people, certainly a lot of people in the media, a lot of pundits out there that felt that it was beyond the pale and that was not something that they should do. But I also feel that in this day and age where it's so easy to just write something and say something that then becomes the gospel or the truth, or the prevailing wisdom out there, you do have to pick and choose your moments. They picked this one, but you know, it's a part of me says you should be allowed. Obviously, you should be allowed, but a huge part of me says this is part of the deal, especially if you are in this position that we are in. that we are giving our opinions each and every day. And if we do it well, there are going to be a segment of people that do not agree with it and vehemently don't agree with it. And there's unfortunately also going to be a segment, and this is the downside of social media and Twitter, that are going to do things and say things that have nothing really to do ultimately with what you said, and are going to say vile, horrible, but despicable things about you that, once again, have nothing to do necessarily with the opinion that you have. I've just come to accept that, and maybe I'm numb to it, and maybe I've lost my capacity to feel or to be sensitive to these things. And if that's the case, then I hope not. But
the fact that she's a female pundit versus a male, like if you're Leeds, would you think twice about sending that tweet just because you know how Twitter is and that you're going to end up attracting a lot of sort of sexist hate in her direction? I mean, how does that factor into it at all? If it had been a male pundit, how different would this story be right now?
It would be different. But I think that in and of itself, while it shows sensitivity, I think in a strange way, if you look at it, also there is an element of disrespect because you are treating somebody differently, and ultimately we all want to be treated. We all want to be treated equally, and so my opinion relative to another person's opinion. And look, I know I'm dealing in hypotheticals and I'm being a little idealistic, and the reality is that who we are and the way that we look and all of our baggage and biases always comes into play. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was really, really interesting in the way that Leeds decided to handle this and how they have gone about continued. And, ultimately, I hope, people will be watching her now and seeing what she says and how she goes on. And I think she'll be fine. She, from what I've seen of her on television, she's doing the job the way the job should be done, where you do say interesting things, where you do say things that are entertaining, where you do say things that are provocative. And that's exactly what she did. And that she got blowback, and that she got blowback from the team. All right, it's going to be, it'll be okay. And now she's not on Twitter, so she doesn't have to deal with that cesspool that it often is.
And after a heavy topic there, we'll end on a more lighthearted note. Austin Duffy said, since State of the Union also doubles as my weekly TV/movie podcast, I want to know your top 3 TV shows and movies from 2020.
Ooh, interesting. Okay. So, and you got 3 too, right, Mosse?
I have 3 TV shows. I really struggled with movies. I didn't watch very many movies this year.
Yeah, I struggled with, and what's a movie now anyway? Okay, so you got 3 too. You want to go back one, and one? Want to do that? I'll do one, then you do one.
Sure.
Okay, so you mentioned it already, but Ted Lasso, and I'm glad that you watched it. I think that it's great. Its greatness is in that it is something that I never anticipated or thought that it would or could be. And they gave it such heart and soul and warmth, and in a completely unpredictable way. And I cannot wait to watch more and to see it grow and to evolve. And so I think just A+ when it comes to a show like that. And so much so that it made me, break my cardinal rule of not watching anything unless it is done. Now, they didn't know they were going to get picked up for not only the second season, but they've already been picked up for the third. So I'm hooked. I am absolutely hooked. And I thought it was one of not just the great comedies. I mean, I think it transcended that. I just think especially in a year where we were searching for things to make us feel good about not just soccer. I know, I mean, make us feel good about humans. Ted Lasso was one of those things. And so many, like I said, unpredictable moments in that. And you do not have to like soccer at all to enjoy this. What about you, Mosse? What's your first one?
Well, first of all, do you want to hear my thoughts on Ted Lasso?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I enjoyed it, but it didn't hit me the way, and I'm clearly in the minority, by the way. It didn't hit me the way it hit you and others. Like, I liked it in still kind of a silly Emily in Paris kind of way. I got a kick out of it, but I didn't think it was like a great TV show. It's funny because I listened to this TV podcast, The Watch, on The Ringer, and they did their top 10 TV shows of 2020. Neither one of them put Ted Lasso in there. And then the next podcast, they said the biggest bit of criticism they got was from Ted Lasso fans who couldn't believe that Ted Lasso wasn't in the top 10. So there's no debating. That show struck a chord with people and was immensely popular. Our boss, Zach Kenworthy, initially stayed away, but then eventually watched it and was also blown away by it and gushing about it. So I'm clearly the minority there.
Would you, would it bother you if the official Ted Lasso account tweeted you and defended after you completely maligned this and sicked all of their Ted Lasso fans on you?
Yeah, I mean, I could come into some criticism for that, and you might recall at the very top of this podcast, I said I don't like superhero movies, so I'm really putting myself out there.
All right, well, what do you like? Give us something that you did like.
We're going to alternate roles here because my number 3 is going to be a show that I loved and that you were lukewarm about. So we're kind of going to flip roles here, which is The Queen's Gambit.
Yeah.
I wanted to get, I'm not bragging about this, but I watched like an incredible amount of television this year, just astonishing. And I mean, I could go through the whole list, and
we all have. Yeah.
But I wanted to get something in there that was new because a lot of the best shows I watch were seasons that came out this year of shows that, have had previous seasons before. So, I don't know if we're talking about best TV shows of 2020, am I really isolating the season that came out in 2020, or am I influenced by the fact that I already liked this show? So that was something new that hit me that I came in fresh, knew nothing about. I hadn't read the book. And so, and it blew me away. And it's a short little mini series, so it's over and done with. And so it's something very 2020-ish. And so I will go with Queen's Gambit as my number 3.
I mean, I didn't hate it, but I didn't, it certainly didn't make my, my top 3. I watched the whole thing, and some really good acting. I thought it was shot really, really well. The story was relatively interesting, but I think it could have been shorter. Okay. My second one is, and you were saying earlier about, being in the minority. Sometimes when something is popular, the human in us and the human instinct is to deflect it and not like it as much because everybody likes it. This was a situation where everybody was talking about it. It blew up, and I not only liked it as much, but maybe even more. And that is, you know it, you love it, or you don't love it, but you certainly know it. Tiger King. Okay. It was a phenomenon. It was a cultural type of phenomenon. I think serendipity, not that anybody anticipates or wants to come out in a pandemic, and yet it hit at that perfect spot when everybody, like you said, was kind of digging in and hunkering down when it came to the pandemic. And it was the television equivalent of sugar. And I just leaned back and let it just pour into my mouth. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Mosse, what'd you think of Tiger King? It didn't make your list, obviously.
That was another one where I initially held off. You're noticing a pattern here with me. If the masses are telling me that something's great, my instinct is to not watch it so I can claim some sort of intellectual superiority over them. But then eventually I come around and I get curious, and I feel left out of conversation. So I was that way with Ted Lasso, that way with Tiger King. So I did eventually watch it, and was thoroughly engrossed like everybody else. Still think that woman murdered her husband and find her to be despicable.
So what do you got?
My number 2, I'm going to get a little artsy fartsy here on you, is season 2 of My Brilliant Friend, which is this absolutely incredible show on HBO. It's this coming of age story of these 2 Italian girls growing up in Naples in the 1950s, Elena Greco and Raffaella Cerullo. And it's frankly one of the most beautiful, just on a purely artistic level, one of the incredible TV shows I've ever seen in my life. I got my dad into it, and I mentioned season 2. Season 1 already aired, I think in 2018 or 2019, and so season 2 came out this year, and it was even better. I absolutely loved it. I can't wait for the future seasons of it. I'm completely engrossed in the story. And so that is my number 2, My Brilliant Friend, which is a HBO program.
All right, sounds good, Mosse. Let's finish it off here. My number 3. I mentioned this.
So wait, were you counting down, or because I just did my 3, my 2, and now I was going to give you my 1? Were we not on the?
I didn't do them in order. Did you do it in order?
Okay, I was.
I just gave you 3.
That's
I just
fine,
gave you
fine.
3.
Go ahead,
okay. If I had to put them in order, I would put Ted Lasso as my number 1. Okay.
That was your favorite TV show of 2020.
Yes, absolutely. And then I would put what I'm about to say as number 2, and I would put Tiger King at 3. So I guess coming at number 2, if you had to rank them there, I didn't know we were doing that, but I mentioned this a couple months ago. I'd watch it. It's a documentary called Boys State, and it is following around these teenage boys that get together for the this state tournament. And I love politics. I love everything about them, even all the craziness and the ugliness. And this was a Lord of the Flies-esque type, Flies-esque type of scenario that I just think said so much about the politics in the United States, and as it played out on, in this case, it was young boys that are learning about politics for the first time, and obviously are engrossed in politics, and they come together down in Texas, and they're they have to separate out into 2 different political sides, and they have to run individuals for offices and for positions, and all of the drama and the political intrigue and the palace stuff that goes on behind the scenes was in full display, but it was being done by kids. And you saw how we as humans, not just kids, but we as humans can be influenced by personality and cult of personality and the way that things are said, as opposed to who's saying them, all that kind of stuff. I just think it was really well done, in that I don't even think you had to really be into politics. And then it came out in 2020 when politics is such a big thing too. I just think that it was a really, really good film. So that's my number 2. And then number 3 was Tiger King.
All right. So my number 1 television viewing experience of 2020 was season 5 of Better Call Saul. Now, this is a show that I had not watched at all going into this year. I binged the first 4 seasons and got caught up to season 5 as it was happening. And so watched the last few episodes of season 5 on a week-to-week basis. And again, absolutely blown away. I mean, this show is the Aaron Rodgers to Breaking Bad's Brett Favre. Like you already had one Pantheon show, and you couldn't imagine that a spinoff of it could be as good or even better. But I think Better Call Saul has achieved that. And, it's a prequel. So somebody years down the road is going to do the ultimate binge of watching them in order. And it's going to end up being 6 seasons of Better Call Saul into 5 seasons of Breaking Bad. And it's going to be 11 seasons of the most incredible television, all in New Mexico. And yeah, I love Better Call Saul. I can't wait for the final season. The second to last episode of season 5, when fans of the show, I know you don't watch it, so won't know what I'm talking about, but where Lalo goes to Jimmy's apartment, and that "Tell Me Again" scene is one of the great scenes in television history. And it's interesting. A little theme here with my shows. My favorite character in Better Call Saul is a woman, Kim Wexler. And then My Brilliant Friend is like I said, a coming of age story about these 2 girls. And then The Queen's Gambit is about a woman. So I was very into sort of female characters this year, and I found them more compelling than some of the male characters in the shows that I watched. So yeah, that's my top 3, counting down Queen's Gambit, My Brilliant Friend, and Better Call Saul.
Well, no, it's not strange that you like women. I mean, there we go.
But yeah, as I mentioned, incredible movie year for me. Incredible television year for me.
Right.
Some of the honorable mentions, I binged stuff like Fauda and Ozark. I even went back and filled some of the holes in my TV watching resume by binging shows like Atlanta and Deadwood. There were terrific seasons of shows like Narcos and The Crown that I love. Everything from like these mini-series shows like The Plot Against America to The Undoing. And then I didn't even include documentaries in this, which I perhaps should have. But yeah, I watched the Ken Burns documentary on World War II. So just so much incredible. Yeah, I mean, I had nothing to do. So what else am I going to do but turn on the television for all those months?
Well, look, we could have had list after list. Like you said, we were all watching, and there was so much. And I know I'm going to miss something. I'm going to think, oh, that was so good, and I remember it. But some of it just kind of comes and goes as we go through this this crazy time, and certainly as we went through last year. All right, well, I hope you like that little detour in there because we do like to talk about what we're watching. We do get a lot of response as to it, and so we wanted to kind of sum up 2020 in terms of what really piqued our interest there. All right, anything else Ask Alexi wise?
That is it.
All right, we're going to take one more quick break, and when we come back, oh yes, it'll be my one for the road. All right, we're back, and it's time for my one for the road. I'm going to pick up on something that I mentioned briefly early in the pod, and that is the responsibility that I feel that we have as a soccer playing nation to not just produce better soccer players, but to, more importantly, produce better men and women that are going to lead our country. And I've said that before. I was going back and forth with someone on Twitter this past week about the potential of someday the United States winning a men's World Cup. Believe me, I would love nothing more than to see that happen. And I do believe that within my lifetime, I will have the chance to see that happen. I know some people feel that that's wishful thinking, but things like that can happen. And I do feel that we're heading in a direction where that could possibly happen. But I don't want it at the expense of a generation or multiple generations. And I told you before, in our zeal to create better soccer players, I do feel that we shouldn't neglect our responsibility when it comes to providing them with as many opportunities and skills as possible. I was thinking early on the more traditional type of soccer path that I took many years ago when I went and my dad kicked my ass out at exit 9 off the New Jersey Turnpike at Rutgers University. And it was my first time playing a real high quality and consistent type of soccer. Now, it's de jure nowadays to crap on soccer and what it is, and believe me, it has plenty of flaws, and we've talked about those many times. But the tools and the skills and the experience that you do get from that, they can be incredibly beneficial going forward. And it goes back to what I said earlier in the pod, where we only see the success stories. We only see those good moments. And look, this is not in any way to suggest that having an education or a college education is the be all and end all, and that alleviates you from any challenges or problems that you have, or that you somehow have are going to be able to navigate life. No, you're hedging your bets, to be quite honest. And all of those many, and the majority and the vast majority that we don't hear their story, all of those ones that have been off there chasing a dream, or that we have pumped up and we have propelled forward because we thought that they could live up and they could be those ones, the ones that they have finished chasing that dream, either because it's just come to the end or because they just can't go on any further. And they don't have lots of money. They don't have lots of fame. That dream has not ultimately become what they thought it was when they made that decision not to get an education. And I'm caught, because while I do want soccer to improve, and I do want American soccer players, and for the most part, right now I'm talking about men's soccer players as it relates to winning a men's World Cup. I do want that to happen. I want to make sure that we know what the cost is. And if we are sitting there ultimately with a World Cup, a men's World Cup, and we are raising it aloft, but it has come on the backs of a generation or multiple generations that we betrayed, and we left without the opportunity to fend for themselves, then that might be a cost that I'm not willing to pay. And, I think about these things, I think about these things as it relates to the leagues that we have, to the United States Soccer Federation, to the development that we have and youth development that we have out there, and what those priorities are out there in the soccer world. And, for the most part, what I'm saying, I think will resonate with a lot of people that are out there in youth soccer, because youth soccer people, they understand the realities and the percentages of players that actually do go on to become the stars is very minimal. And so they do recognize the responsibility that they have. I just hope that we, in our zeal to be better, in our zeal to possibly win a men's World Cup, that we don't abandon some of those principles that I do believe have not just made us a unique and special American soccer culture, but I do believe have helped America in doing that, because we have produced men and women, and that we have given them, like I said, those tools and those skills and those opportunities and those experiences to go on and function in life, and in a life that might not have soccer. And sometimes those things are at odds, and sometimes they work against each other. And that push and pull and that balance might go different ways as we move on, and as we want more, and as we want better soccer players, and we want better soccer in our country. But I just think about that cost, and I will continue to think about it. And I'm going to talk to some people this year actually about what that cost is and how we are going about it when it comes to especially youth soccer, because I'm interested, and I look at it sometimes, and I'm at a 30,000 foot level oftentimes when I think and talk about it, and I want to kind of get into some of those details. I do remain and believe that I benefited from the education that I had. And when I say I benefited as an individual and as a person, first and foremost. When you're cooking is when you can have that part of it and the soccer part of it, and you can come out of it better. But we'll see. We'll see what it looks like going forward when it comes to a traditional type of college education and the American soccer player, and what that ultimately looks like going forward. Mosse, anything before we head off?
That is it.
All right. Well, it's great to be here with you and with Jeff and with Louise and everybody out there in 2021. Everyone that is listening and watching. We are back. We are starting. If I'm not mistaken, we're almost to our fourth year, Mosse. Is that right? Third year, fourth year? Gosh, I'd have to look back. I think we started in February of 2018, 19, 20, 20. No, so 3 years probably. We're coming up to our 3-year anniversary.
Essentially 3 years.
Wow.
We started, I remember, the week of the Patriots-Eagles Super Bowl.
Oh. Wow. All right. Well, listen, we will talk again next week, same time, same place. Thank you for reviewing and writing to us. Make sure you use that hashtag #AskAlexi out there, and keep doing the ratings and, like I said, the reviews and the downloads and all that kind of stuff, whether you're watching or whether you are listening. Have a great week, and we will talk to you again next week. And as always, size the day. You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops every week. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.